So I'm going to go ahead and call the December 11th, 2025 meeting of the Circulation and ILL Advisory Group to order at 9:30 a.m. A note here. Taking care of roll. It looks like all of the members are here today. Can you hear me okay? Okay,
Yes.
beautiful. After our September 11th meeting, Mieko sent out the draft minutes. Are there any revisions to those minutes? No. Seeing head shakes and hearing none, I'm going to
No.
accept the minutes as submitted. Thank you. All right. Last week, I also shared out our agenda and packet for today's meeting, and since there is no old business, I can go ahead and jump in with new. We have a couple of topics to cover. So Mieko, if you don't mind hopping onto the PowerPoint.
Let me know if you can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. We can go ahead and click to the first. Perfect. So the first topic that we're talking about today is adding blocks to patrons from other libraries. So this is a conversation that came up at the last circulation technical group. Just so for some background, there was a lengthy conversation about whether staff should be able to place blocks on patrons from other libraries. So Mieko, if you want to pop over to the next slide. When I'm talking about hard blocks, we want to specify that we're looking at that notes tab and that blocking notes that I've highlighted on the left. We want to have a conversation and maybe clarify the circulation manual to decide if we are going to specify that only libraries from like the home library can add a blocking note here, or if any library can. Mako, if you pop onto the next one, we have potential motions. So like the first one would be a recommendation that the circulation manual only allows for the patron's home library to add a blocking note, versus option B would be that any library can add blocking notes. I will say that option B is CCS's recommendation because we believe that there are instances that other libraries may need to place a blocking note, especially we know we have patrons that utilize perhaps your library more than they're actually registered at library. So we do want to make sure that you have like the agency and the power to be able to add a blocking note if there is an issue happening. That being said, I'm okay if we hop off the PowerPoint for now, Miyako, and we can have a discussion together on how we're feeling about this, and I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Hi. I thought it was always the rule that we were not allowed to do that, that we had to call the manager at the other library and ask them.
So currently the circulation manual says that if you add a blocking note, you're the only one, that library is the only one that can remove or edit it. But there's nothing specifying in the manual on who can add a note.
I was under the same impression as Cheryl. Like when we started in 2018, it was no. You could do it to RBPs, but you couldn't do it to another CCS member library's patron. You had to contact them, even if it was your what they consider their home library. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it wasn't, might not have been stated in the manual, CCS manual, but I was also under the impression that we couldn't put blocks on someone else's, a patron from another library. We would have to contact that library first.
I think if we, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut someone off. Was someone speaking?
Okay, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, hey, Janine. I guess my main thing is I would want a flow chart of if this is something that CCS is recommending to do option B, how we have it set up. Like, was it checked out at your library for the first thing instead of being returned at your library? There's so many extenuating circumstances that occur that I think we need clear guidelines to be able to determine what that looks like. So, like, if I return something, Carrie, I know you're here. It's in my patron returns something, and then Carrie gets it back in her bin and decides to block the patron. My patron has no idea, like why all of a sudden a block showed up or why another library is calling. And I think that's why we originally said for the home library to be the one, because all of a sudden Zion or another library is calling them and they have no idea that they borrowed a Zion book or a Fox River Valley book.
I think also go in the other direction. I don't want someone taking a block off that they think they should take off, and I don't want to take it off.
Mhm.
I want to jump in as a newer CCS member. So when we joined, I didn't get the impression, and I want to also preface this by saying we are not in the habit of adding blocking notes to other library patrons regularly. But I didn't get the impression that you all have who've been here longer that we were not allowed to do that. And there are definitely instances where, like, if they are using our library more than their home library, they return something, it's been missing. We don't go immediately to blocking, but if we've contacted them and there are reasons that we would potentially put a blocking note. And the big message that I received when we did join was what Kiara had said, where like, if you are the library who added the note, only you can remove the note, which I have some questions and concerns about that sometimes too, which I think is part 2 of this question. So I won't go into it right now, but like, I agree with Kim that maybe there needs to be some kind of flow chart, but I think to outright deny other libraries the ability to put a blocking note if it's not their library's patron, I think limits us a little bit.
I will jump in and say that a flow chart, I agree, would be really helpful. And we add blocking notes sometimes, not often, but I feel like there are circumstances where it is helpful. And I can't think really off the top of my head, but there are certain circumstances where it would be more helpful to just be able to add the note yourself for sure.
I'm also in favor of letting any library, especially because of what's already been stated. Maybe they don't use their home library. I know we're kind of in the side pocket of CCS, but a lot of other libraries where the overlap is a lot more blurry for patrons. I mean, our biggest use is like to make sure the patron stops by a desk to make sure we can like communicate with them if something is amiss with a return or something like that. But if, yeah, the same thing, if they never use the Dundee library because they're always at Algonquin, having us call them to be like, I've never stepped foot in there before. Like, why are you calling me, even if you're my home library? And that's just confusing for folks.
I lean towards any library being able to do it as well. Um, but also because I think anecdotally, I find that we all would contact each other anyways if the home library thought it was a problem that I added a note about it. And I think usually when we're adding that blocking note, there's a valid reason. And I feel like we lean like 90%, we all agree that it should have a blocking note. I don't know if there's a way to, well, there probably is, I don't even know, but like to double check our own hard block notes once a month, like if we wanted to double check like what got added or something, if we're concerned.
I I will say this, and this kind of piggybacks on what Janine was saying, is the secondary part is that if a patron pays online for an item and we don't know about it, that blocking note stays on. And this occurred last night with another library, and we deleted the note. The patron was very frustrated because of the fact that they took care of the situation on their own, like they were asked to, and the blocking note still stood. So, like, let's say if something's damaged, missing a disc, you tell your patron they need to pay, they pay online, the note is still there. I feel like if we have the ability, if they correct the situation, we should be able to remove the note so that they can continue to use their card. In this case, this was years old, and they were like, my home library didn't take care of it. The other library didn't take care of it. So we took care of it because there was nothing.
Mhm.
There was nothing. I think we worry about like the guidelines, like people charging, and I know we're getting like into the claims return later. I think we need clear guidance of what we can and cannot. What is a blocking note? You know, forgot their wallet at the library. Maybe that's a blocking note so that a library person can tell them, but they have to remember to delete the note. And that's what's not necessarily happening. So I agree with Jennifer. There needs to be the ability to check those notes.
Yeah, I fully agree with that because we come across that a lot where, and I think it's more with some libraries than others that we notice it. Some libraries leave a lot of blocks, whether they're blocking or non-blocking, but then it feels like they never go back and clean them up. And it's really hard to see like a paragraph of blocks. It makes it really messy. So I totally get why you wouldn't want to delete someone else's blocks, but it can make it really tough when libraries add a lot of blocks and then you're not allowed to remove them and what's going on gets a little confusing.
Yeah.
Or it feels like a valid reason, like Kim was saying, we've definitely come across that, where like there's a valid reason to remove the block because the situation has been resolved. Um, and we would probably opt to do exactly what you did, Kim, and remove it because it's not the patron's fault.
Mm-mm. Well, I
Yeah,
think too, just customer service wise, like you have, your associate or somebody out front and they're reading a paragraph that can be very upsetting. And then it starts the member on such a negative path with the conversation too.
We came across a patron that I had to call their other library that they check out. They met the character limit. So we had to go through and I had to have them but that took a while, like to
mhm.
be able to have them go through all of those notes plus the other libraries that they're affiliated with that have borrowed and they're still near their character limit. And I know it's in the notes, but people put the blocking notes or whatever it is at the very bottom and they're supposed to be at the very top. And I think that's the other aspect that gets lost because then you're scrolling. And in this one, it was very long.
I know I'm like kind of deviating from the point, but I want to go back to something that Kim said about like the types of blocking notes because I run into that where it's like a charge related thing versus like a lost wallet or something like that. And that almost feels redundant at the detriment of the patron because they're already blocked if they've got charges. You can already put notes on those
Mhm.
charges, or at the very least, like what the charge is for. It's damaged, it's missing a piece. And I know there are well, I believe there are guidelines from CCS about what qualifies as a blocking note, but that almost feels like we should be avoiding putting not like charge based something, but something that's just duplicating what's already in the charges because of exactly that. Then the person's like, I reconciled this and I still can't use it. What's wrong with this?
Kira, do you mind if I add something? So, I've been getting some previews of the next Polaris upgrade, which we anticipate we're going to upgrade our training database in January, and then probably our production database later in spring. One of the big new features that's coming with this is a new notice field. Um, or I'm sorry, not notice field, a new note field. So I think this is a really good time for us to kind of talk about how we do notes and what our like standards and workflows are. Um, so I think I've been taking notes because I've been hearing a lot of good things that like, when we look at this new note functionality, we can start kind of incorporating these questions in. Um, so I did just want to put that out there that like this is probably going to open us up to kind of a more in-depth conversation next quarter once we kind of see what this new functionality looks like.
Can I make a suggestion then? Could we meet in person and just whiteboard it and sit there and go through and determine what that looks like? Like, these are the ones we want in A, B, C. So that way, like the block. So the thing is I feel like we already have three notes. We have non-blocking, we have blocking, and then that little add a text block, which is the one people forget the most. And that's what happened last night, that was there. I think meeting in person, I know it's probably going to be January or February, whatever it is, but then determining what that looks like for all of us and hashing that out and then bringing it to the group would be very beneficial for us after we play with it for a while. That's just my thought.
I think that sounds like a great idea. That was actually a conversation that we also had. We were prepping this meeting. We were like, are we talking about the specific hard blocks note where they type in? Are we talking about the library specific notes? Are we talking about the text or other, like, the tab. So being able to sit down and decide like what libraries are allowed to add where and who can edit, change, and what it's going to look like with the new upgrade, I think is a really good plan. Um, Miyako, what are your thoughts on what that means about this conversation now and this decision?
So we could go one of two ways, right? We could kind of make a motion, and it would go to the January tech group, and we could put that into practice now. Or, we can just kind of have more of a general discussion about notes and blocks and kind of table any action to the next meeting, once we kind of have a better and bigger picture of what the new notes development looks like.
Okay.
I'd say personally, I would be happy either way.
I agree. It sounds like we all are on the same page, but we're a little split on how to process this blocking note. So if we want to table it, I'm very comfortable with that as well.
I also feel like it's kind of two different conversations because based on the conversation, it seems like without taking a vote, we might all vote pretty similarly, but then it's talking about, like Kim said, the logistics of, but how does this work? And determining who can delete what, when, or add what, when. So yeah, I think either way is fine.
I feel like tabling it because if we ask them to do a motion in January to approve and then we don't like the way that, or we want to adjust our decision, then we have to wait again and go through it again. And they're just like, no, we've already motioned this. So I feel like I make the motion to pause and wait till we all can meet at the next advisory meeting to determine what these notes look like and then bring it to the group. So I make that motion.
I have a question kind of piggybacking on that though, because our next advisory meeting wouldn't be till what, March?
Yes, our next advisory meeting is March, let's see, what do we say?
Good call, Janine.
Like 11th? Miyako, do you know the date at the top of your head?
You were just about there, March 12th.
March 12th. Oh, so close. Oh,
So
yes,
if
here
we
it is.
tabled it till then, I mean, do we want to table it for that long? Could we have a meeting between now and March? One, like, I haven't been on this very long. I don't know that that is a thing that can be done, but like, could we have like an in-between meeting to maybe prep for whatever in March and then bring that to the bigger group? Because that just feels like been a really long time to wait. You're talking another 6 months to a year before we make any decisions, which could be fun. I'm just in
So
I'm like, let's do it.
yeah, I mean, we could absolutely schedule a meeting outside of, it's a small committee. We can adjust our meeting schedule if we need. I would say we definitely want to. I'm sorry, Kira. I'm like just like jumping in here. We'd want to prepare any motion for the April Circ Tech meeting.
I
And
remove.
I would, sorry, I'm so sorry, Kim.
No, I was just
I
going to
would
say I
also
remove my
say,
motion then because I agree with Janine. So no, I would alter my motion then. So thank you,
okay,
Janine, for bringing that up.
I would also say we CCS would definitely need some time to kind of explore and understand the new notes functionality. So I would say probably no earlier than February, if we did do an adjusted meeting schedule.
Yeah, I think getting to see what the new notes field looks and acts like is a big part of this conversation. And I don't know, I think somebody mentioned this, it might have been you, Kim. Like right now, there are no reports we can run on the notes fields, are there? Or are there? And I'm not aware of them.
Simply reports. I believe you
I was gonna
can.
say,
You can
You
for sure on
can.
Simply Reports
Yeah.
because the
Yeah,
only
and
one
then
that's
there's
on Web Reports is Legacy Notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I have done that like a wild hair that it's like, let's clean these up. And that's exactly what it was.
Maybe that's part of our future recommendation too, is like looking at those reports that I didn't know existed. Because it is hard to catch old notes sometimes, especially if the patron isn't at your library a lot or whatever it is. But because that's a big part of the problem that I think we encounter with patrons that are not our home library patrons. .
And I feel like we already have something in place where we already talk to each other when it comes to blocking notes.
Mhm.
So, and those watching the recording are going to see that there was a difference between the group from 2018 versus the group that joined with Janine Palatine, Grace Lake, and all of those that are a little bit later. So I feel like we're already doing the status quo of what we've been doing. So I think having a February meeting would be wise to do. So that way we can play around with it, see what it looks like. Again, I think that would be wise.
Yeah, I'm also in favor of tabling this decision until we can take a look at the new note field. And I'm certainly okay with meeting again in February.
Yeah, I agree with meeting in February. I think it would make the most sense to wait because it sounds like this would change the landscape of that completely. So
Mhm.
Yeah, agreed.
Right. Miko, do I need a motion to table an item? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, then let's plan to table it. We will work on CCS will work on taking a look at what that new field looks like. I know we talked about a bunch of different like workflows and flow charts so that we will prepare for that. And then we will meet at some point in February. We'll send out details on that and send out any messaging that will prepare you for that meeting. And I think we can wrap up this topic if everyone feels okay with that. All right. Awesome. Then I'll pass it over to Mieko.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Um, so I am, there we go, going to do the next one, which is overriding patrons with hard blocks. So first of all, I just want to say, like, since since the packet went out last week, we've done a little more like research into the policy and the history of the policy. So I think the questions on like the focus of the discussion may have changed a little bit since the packet went out last week. I'm going to take a few more minutes than I anticipated to give some background on what we're talking about. So, at the October technical group meeting, the Circ Tech group meeting, the group were discussing if libraries should override hard blocks for patrons from other libraries. And the feedback included both that the home library should be the ones overriding hard blocks, or the transaction library should be able to take it like case by case, since it's, items belonging to the transaction library that are at risk. So the question being taken to the advisory group around libraries being able to override hard blocks to check out to patrons from another library. And I will just like specify that in these discussions, we are focused on situations where the library will override but not resolve a hard block scenario. So if the patron owes over their library's threshold, their home library's like fee threshold, patron's card is expired, the patron has a library assigned block like verify ID, or the patron has blocking note or free text blocks. So one thing that we need to consider is what is in the governing board policies. So these policies are rules that have been reviewed and approved by governance that all libraries are expected to adhere to. And so this is the text from the current policy. So this policy specifically references library assigned blocks, which is a very Polaris specific term. And this is kind of what started us like really digging in. So, over the past week, we were trying to figure out what was the intent with this language. Was it specifically referencing library assigned blocks, right? And excluding free text block and blocking notes? Was it being used as a catch-all term for all hard blocks? So the history we found out around this policy was that the adoption of this policy coincided with the dissolution of quarterly billing. And for staff who weren't around at that time, CCS used to track how much money from fines and fees owed to a library was paid to other libraries. And so member libraries received quarterly reports detailing how much money they owed to other libraries for fees they'd taken in, and libraries sent payments back and forth. So we stopped the quarterly billing process after a year-long study that essentially found the amount a library was sending out was like proportionate to what they received, and that was not even accounting for the amount of staff time it was taking to work on quarterly billing and processing payments. So additionally, this policy was drafted in 2019. It was meant to go to Bylaws and Policy Committee at their March 16th, 2020 meeting, which, ended up being canceled. So the policy revision never formally made its way to the Circ technical group for review. And it ended up just getting kind of swept into a draft that was later approved by governing board. And I will also mention that governing board has kind of gone through that policy document since 2020. They've reviewed and reapproved things since then. So anyway, so that is kind of the background of where our current policy came from. This led us back to the previous iteration of the policy, which was adopted in 2012, back when we were on a different ILS, which was Symphony. And as you can see, uses very Symphony-specific language. And this policy specifies that libraries are required to refuse borrowing privileges in the case of a block, unless it's your patron and the block involves your own items and/or fees, or you get permission from the library that assigns the block, and then it gives an allowance to apply best judgment if you cannot reach the library. So one scenario you can think of here is if the library, is closed because they aren't open Sundays during the summers. So with that, what are we discussing? What are we looking at today? So my questions for the group, do we leave our current policy as is? And if so, how do we interpret it? How are we interpreting that library assigned block? Do we revise the policy to kind of clarify language? And if so, what does that look like? So, we had some discussion questions in the packet that I still want to look at. The first thing I just want to pull up here that we can use for kind of a reference point with our discussion. So if we do want to revise and clarify, we can pull out that Polaris specific language to kind of make us a little more clear for, future us. So that was a very long-winded background into what CCS policies have been around working with patrons with blocks. I want to stop sharing for a moment so I can just kind of open the floor for initial thoughts and questions. And then we can kind of figure out, where we want to go with this.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
You didn't mention long overdue. Long overdue, is that considered a secondary block? Because I just want to be clear, because I feel like that's the instance that occurs the most when it comes to things. So can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, that would be considered a hard block. So that is another thing with our current policy language where it's it's not technically a library assigned block. It's not technically a fee, but it is stopping patrons from checking out. So if we are going to clarify the policy language, I want to make sure that we apply language that would include those long overdue situations.
So I think this is tricky for me for a number of reasons. And I also realize based on the last technical group meeting that we might do things a little bit differently here than some of the libraries who've been here longer. So in our case, we only have select staff who can even provide an override. So not any staff can. So if we are providing an override, whether it is for one of our own blocking situations or for another libraries, we have a supervisor or someone who is here more often making that call. So, you know, most of the time I trust their judgment more than just like a part-timer who's not here as much and might want to override just to get out of a tricky situation. I also feel like the other element of it, if and when, in the rare instances we choose to override, is we are putting our material at risk at this point. They're in our library checking out our material. So we are deciding that based on whatever blocks are there, if we override, that it is an acceptable risk to us for whatever reason, which I think makes me think of the situation a little bit differently sometimes. And I say this knowing that we don't override blocks very often. I feel like there was one other thing. Oh, and then the other thing, the way the policy is written, and maybe this is intentional, but when you're talking about fees, not necessarily like long overdues or other types of blocks, there's a loophole very clearly right in there where like, oh, they're over the block, but if I just waive it, then now they're fine. And I don't know if that's the message we want to send or that other libraries would be happy about. Like if we've chosen to bill someone for something, typically we're not going to reduce it very much beyond like what our standard is. And depending on the situation, because we want them to clear it up we charge so infrequently for things at this point that if a block is there, we do really want them to be held accountable for it financially. So yeah, that was just I don't know that I have a point there other than like thinking out loud about how just as it's presented the things that I'm thinking about.
So Janine, what about if you have a patron who is requested items at your library for your patron, but they're brought in from another library?
Well, I think if they're requesting things at our library, but they're not our material, that changes the question. And again, I'm saying this, we don't override other libraries' hard blocks or our own very often at all. It's very case by case, often a supervisor is involved. But I think like if they were coming into our library, checking something out off of our shelves, we know that we're taking a risk, depending on whatever we're seeing on their account, that that thing might not come back or it might not come back on time or whatever the situation is based on the blocks that we see.
Yeah, Carrie, also, we only have 2 people that can override. So a lot of times it's not an option because there's no one there that can.
I guess it's difficult for patrons to understand. Also, that's the other aspect is that within the vicinity of us, we have so many libraries. So they just think we're one big group. And I think the big issue here is that long overdue button or whatever it may be, that's the issue that I agree with Janine. It's your materials, you're dealing with the patron right then and there, but I now have to send a patron away to go get something fixed. Typically, we'll place it on hold, send it to their home library. If it's that egregious of an error or something like that, we will send it to that library so that they can get fixed. But in the moment, you're sending someone away, and that's the hardest part. So then they get a sour taste about you and their experience at your home library because their home library is not allowing them to do something. And I think that's the hardest aspect is having to turn someone away. And they don't understand that it's one day long overdue and they just forgot it at home. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that is hard for the patron to understand. And then we become the person that they have that discussion with that can get very unfavorable. And then one thing our library has really tried to do is how can we get to a yes situation without involving an upset patron? We don't charge for damaged materials, which tends to be a very long conversation with someone. We don't do a lot of those things because we want to make sure our staff feel safe at work and that they have that psychological safety as well. And I feel like when you're talking about long overdue, because that's a big issue. And it tends to eat at the staff that get that retribution towards from that patron. So sorry, that was very long-winded and just kind of my feeling about it's like Janine said, it's our material and we're making the best decision in that case. And I will let you know that everyone at all clerk levels have the ability to override any transaction. That was decided when we went to LEAP that they would have the ability to make the best decision for the library based upon the situation they were in with the patron.
For me, all of these topics are obviously connected. Like Mieko, before you even said quarterly billing, my brain was like, this is like quarterly billing. And then you just continued. It's like, oh yeah. And it's tough because I continue to feel like that's just part of the deal with being in CCS. And maybe that's a really like flip approach to it, but I'm depending on the severity of the block, like the long overdues is also what immediately comes to mind. And it's to me connected to like the usage of the notes. Is this the first time this person has ever had a long overdue item and they've got a stack and it's like, oh, we're not going to let you go with these 10 picture books versus like, you know what, we'll let you go this time and then put a note saying they got to go this first time so that it doesn't become a habitual thing that you're dealing with. Like I am very much in the equity camp of like, oh, this was an accident? Sure, like no problem. And so I continue to be in support of like that service point library making the best decision because it is that customer service. Like we are clearly going away from like the strict hardcore enforcement of like fines and fees versus like what's going to make it less stressful for staff, less dangerous for staff, but also like keep patrons happy without them letting take advantage of us kind of thing. And so I'm also thinking out loud. Like I'm in favor of just letting staff, whether they're the home library or not, because patrons don't understand that. Like they go to the library that they go to. It doesn't matter where they had to get their card and just having them reconcile that kind of thing.
No, I agree with all those points as well. I mean, it's all about the patron having the best experience possible when they're visiting your library. And it really depends on the notes and the history there. You know, if there's a build item from a year ago, obviously it's going to have to be resolved. But, you know, there are things that come up where it is sort of like a case by case, and you can, you know, make that decision to go ahead and check them out.
I agree that we should not be asking a member to understand our intergovernmental agreements on any level. I think we all sell ourselves as like, oh my gosh, we're part of this, and you have all these options now, and then we're taking it away. And I think if we're so worried about long overdues, and granted there are very much certain exceptions, but like, why do we get rid of fines and fees then? You know what I mean? It's like we need to finish cutting the barrier a little bit.
A couple other things I was thinking about as everybody else has been talking is um, I think part of where the tension comes in, and I'm thinking of when this came up at the tech group, like there are different philosophies at play, and many of us have gone much more lenient, but there are a few libraries, and you can tell by like the notes left on cards that are still very much about that accountability. And I think that's where some of this tension comes into play. And like thinking about it and how I would feel if somebody overrode one of our blocks. The thing that happens that we get most worked up about, I think, when somebody overrides is like, we have our Library of Things collection that only our patrons or people visiting our library can check out. And it is long overdue, or it can't be renewed because someone's on hold for it, and another library renews it. Like, why did you renew that? That is overdue and it's us and somebody's waiting for it. That's the thing we get worked up about. You waive a fine, you decide to check out your material. That's totally fine. But I think, yeah, I don't know. It's very complicated. And I think some libraries would probably push back at the idea that whatever is on that account is not followed to a T. But we're also, like, Mount Prospect is a library that I think, like Kim was talking about, and Carrie, like, we're reducing those barriers. We let a lot of things slide. We don't charge for damage. We don't. So, like, if we are getting to the point that we're blocking something, it's very egregious, but that's not what I necessarily see from every library. So I
And
could
go ahead.
push.
Sorry. And I just want to, I guess maybe that's where some clarity too. And I know we're kind of jumping because we're all focused on this overdue, which is not part of the CCS, like it's part of the CCS governing board language, but we're all fine with the other stuff of that language, it feels like, but this one thing is where it's a hot topic. I think the main thing to be said is we're overriding the checkout, but we should not be doing anything else with the account. So when you said they were renewing your items, my brain just went, no, 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 no. We should just be leaving the account as it is, but making the decision to check out. We don't, unless there's a renewal still available because the hold got filled, I will renew it because now it's renewable. Other than that, no, leave the account as it is. You're not doing anything else to it. I guess, like, again, here comes that flow chart of like, this is okay, this is not okay, you know? Miyako, I know this is not necessarily the conversation you may have expected because we all have these, like Janine said, there's specific libraries that have different thoughts process and everything. But I guess to go back to the major topic is that language that you're asking for. Okay.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off of Kim, I would say, like, for CCS, I think our role here in this conversation is, like, how can we clarify or update that policy to give flexibility to allow libraries, to provide those positive patron experiences while also respecting boundaries of our fellow libraries. And I do agree that if we update the language in the policy, we should specify overriding to check out. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to go to that slide that included the kind of that draft update. I'd be interested in workshopping that a little bit with you all, just to kind of see like what language or what additions or removals would be the most helpful. So obviously whatever is in red is what has been modified in this draft. And let me see if I can, like, zoom in a little more here. Okay. So with the conversation we just had, the group, it sounds like the group would be interested in applying language that says, like, library may apply block override to check out. For unresolved blocks. And my Zoom is down, so I can't see, like, nods or, like, I can't see faces. So do feel free to, like, unmute yourself and chime in. And one of the questions we're talking about now is, like, this pending permission from the library that applied the block.
Hey, Mieko, would it just make better sense? Because I feel like at the bottom we did it is member libraries shall apply best practice and local policy when determining whether to check out or accept reduced payment or waived. Would that kind of, because then it allows that local library to make their decision rather than saying, like, rather than adding it to the top, because some libraries feel differently, and then other
Mhm.
libraries may want to do what's best at that case and time. I don't know if that kind of simplifies the language.
I think it still is a little bit at odds because like the first paragraph is saying you are required to refuse borrowing privileges to people who do X. But then the second paragraph says you can apply local practices. I almost feel like we need to combine those two things like somehow because they
It's like,
contradict each other the way they are written.
yeah. Would something like expected? You're expected to refuse borrowing privileges, but you can apply best practices and local policies when determining to check out or accept reduced or waived payments.
I think that's better, yeah.
I also think it needs to be removed fine threshold. Is that actually the language? Because fine means money that's the only other thing
It,
that I would change.
I think that is the language, check language. I do see fee threshold would make more sense there. And if we did want to avoid like any kind of Polaris specific language, which was my goal here, we'd probably want to say something like maximum second level of fine.
But isn't it pertaining to
I'm
more
just
than
gonna,
just fines?
yeah, yeah. I think the Polaris language is second level fine threshold. If we wanted to make it non-ILS specific, in my mind, maximum fee threshold would be a little more general and apply to everything, essentially.
What do you think instead of expected? What do you think about libraries must pause borrowing privileges? And then,
Group?
because I don't know if it's that such a formal word that's going to catch the hang up.
I'll say that I kind of like expected. I think expected is a good word. Pause seems like it's just a very different meaning than what expected would be implying. Like pause to me is more similar to like required.
Yeah.
I can see that.
So,
Thanks for
sorry,
typing that
I
out,
think I,
Mieko.
Oops. So if we were to present a potential policy revision saying every CCS member is expected to refuse borrowing privileges to any patron who exceeds their home library's maximum fee threshold or whose account is blocked from checking out. Member libraries shall apply best practices and local policies when determining whether to check out or accept reduced payment or waive charges involving non-local patrons or intra-CCS loan material. So pause for a second and think of back to some of the discussion that we had. Would this policy give libraries kind of the flexibility they need to make those kind of case by case judgment calls while still kind of respecting the boundaries of libraries, of our libraries?
I think it does. I wonder if, and maybe this is more procedural as opposed to policy, but it goes back to Kim's flowchart idea of like the things that we really should respect. Like, wasn't checked out at your library, not your material, you shouldn't touch it. Kind of a thing, because none of that is spelled out in here. It gives us the flexibility to do more than the policy states right now, which I think is great, but it doesn't call out those things that we really shouldn't be touching, if that makes sense.
Agree.
That does make sense.
Yeah, and I also think that like procedural wise, that's where CCS can come up with the procedure. One thing that is kind of sticking out to me is it says who exceeds their home library's maximum fee. We have a lot of RBPs. You know, like what is considered a home library? Or could it just be the patron's account instead of home library?
So for our setup, if you belong to a CCS library, your home library sets your max fee threshold, and that limit follows you around no matter where you go. Libraries, for non-CCS patrons, libraries are able to set kind of their own max fee threshold for those non-CCS reciprocal borrowers.
So what would happen if you have an Arlington Heights patron who comes to us and our max threshold is $25, but then they go to another library and that threshold is 50? What happens when they go to that other library? Does it follow wherever they're checking out at the time? So it wouldn't flag it as max for them because their threshold is higher?
Correct.
Okay.
Ooh, Mieko, can you further explain that for me? Because so whenever we do set up a reciprocal patron, we are supposed to be using like the CCSB, reciprocal patron, et cetera, in the patron account, right? So how is it able to determine different fine thresholds if an Arlington Heights versus an Ella Johnson versus a CPL patron is all technically under that CCSB umbrella of patron account?
So at every library, let me see how quickly I can log into the back end here. At every library, your library has your own basically fee table. And how it is set up, if you give me just 1 second here, this is not going to make sense unless you have a visual. So I'm going to pull up a table for us to look at.
I always thought it was like CCSB was all the same. That was but it's not, it must not be so.
Libraries are able to set up their own limits for non-CCS reciprocal borrowers. Yeah. Okay, we are going to use Okay, ready for a crash course here? So I'm in Fox River Valley's back end right now. So how this works in Polaris, every library needs to have what's called a patron material type loan limit block chart. So this chart or this table will record the maximum amount of items checked out, maximum of fees, maximum amount of holds. So for all CCS patrons, it's like an ALK patron, those limits are determined by Algonquin and then copied into all other libraries' tables. So Algonquin is going to say, we allow ALK patron to have a max limit of $10 on their card before they are blocked. And then that limit is applied to every library's table. Now, when it comes to non-CCS patrons, they don't have a CCS home library. So Fox River Valley is able to say, when it comes to reciprocal patron codes, we are going to allow them to have up to $10 on their card before they are blocked. So then we will set whatever Fox River Valley determines in Fox River Valley's table. At Northbrook, they may say $15 is our max level fine threshold. So in Northbrook's table, you may see the patron code reciprocal patron having a max fee threshold of $10.
Can you go to Winnetka? Because I know that they have a different one. I think theirs is 50, and that may be, is that possible? Because we had this discussion with one of the staff members who works at both libraries. And maybe, yeah,
Winnetka also has theirs, the reciprocal set to 10.
10.
And their local patron codes set to 50.
So if a Winnetka patron came to our library, they could check out because they haven't met their $50 limit.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So that's a crash course on how that second level fee is applied. It's probably more information than you ever wanted to know about the backend tables. Thanks for indulging me there. Okay, I'm going to go back to that draft policy. So I will say the home library designation is in there in order to specify that the CCS library that max fee threshold follows them. It's set by their home library and follows them around the system.
So can I just ask, this doesn't involve money, but like for holds. So does this policy also affect holds? Or do we have a different one? Because I'm wondering because like RBPs can place a hold on material that's new and you'll click through the override to, like they'll say this patron is not allowed to place a hold on this type of material, for new material or whatever it may be. Or they may have met their hold threshold at another library. Does this also affect that?
No, so this policy is just
Okay,
referring borrowing.
Okay. Thank you.
So with a policy revision, so again, this would be the governing board policies kind of dictates the rules that we're all expected to follow. With a policy revision, this would go to, let me look at my notes here. It would go to circulation for review. And if approved there, it would go to a governance meeting for formal approval and adoption into the policy manual. Beyond policy, our circulation manual and our documentation are focused around workflow. So if this policy is adopted, we could then have future discussions about workflow. I know you guys brought up flow charts. I don't know if a flow chart would be helpful when you're like face to face with the patron, but policy adoption could open us up to those kind of decisions or discussions.
I just want to check in and back to what Janine was talking about with library things, because those collections have become so large and important just in these last couple of years. I agree that we need, even when you're training somebody new out there, you want to be able to say, hey, not your library, you don't touch it. But I feel like this might, until we get to like this workflow place, it gives people the right to begin to change what we need done with larger bills or larger issues that need to be resolved. I mean, I don't want, if they owe me $250 for Roku equipment or whatever, I don't want them walking over to Mount Prospect and checking out. I need them to get that resolved. So I don't know how the group's feeling, but I'm just a little concerned that we're letting some things float without some of the bigger issues being resolved that we face, especially library things.
I was gonna say, is there a way, and we're also rewriting our Circ policy right now, and Library of Things features prominently as like its own separate thing within the policy. And we're also figuring out how to battle abuse of the collection and how do we block patrons. So like I do think Library of Things, and I know this is a tangent to what we're talking about, even though it's sort of related, like it is kind of its own beast. And I completely agree with Jennifer. Like if it's our Library of Things collection, I don't want them doing anything until they resolve whatever the problem is there. And I would assume most libraries feel similarly because of the specialty and the high value and demand of those collections. But I don't know if there is a way to address that within our policy somehow.
Is that too detailed to explicitly write out? Like, is that like preventing future proofing for this document? Because uh, but I understand it's you want to hope that any of those libraries would be like a DVD that's 15 years old, whatever, versus you have the telescope, please give it back. Like, let's fix this right away.
Yeah, I would not get that specific in a policy. And I think, one thing we need to consider about here is, if with this policy, we either are going to give libraries that flexibility with kind of a general agreement between one another that we are going to apply best judgment. If we don't trust one another to apply best judgment, then we're going to need to kind of walk back on that policy and say, only with permission of that home library, or you take that more restrictive approach.
I was thinking with the Library of Things instance, if someone goes to another library to pay for it, you're not getting the money back for it anyways. Then it's going to that other library. So if you're reducing the fee, it's not going to hurt the home library because they're not going to get any of it. Correct?
I'm so sorry, Cheryl. I can't, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Oh, sorry if I'm on the phone.
I was going to
no,
say
I'm
she's,
saying,
go ahead.
oh, could somebody else hear me?
I heard you, Cheryl, so I just was going to say it a little louder if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
She had shared that if someone lost a library of things material and they were at another library, that library said, hey, you owe this amount, they'll pay it there, and the home library doesn't see that money anyways. Is that correct, Cheryl?
Yes. Yeah. So even if you are reducing the fee for a patron, like the wording is letting you do, it's not going to affect the whole library.
Understood about that. I'm talking more about the checking out materials at that other library then. I think it's, I hear you about wanting to be flexible and totally, I would say as a group, totally trust each other. But I do think with new libraries coming on with, front of house staff, it seems like there is different levels of privileges extended, just where we say it and how, like, I don't know, but library of things is a new beast and it's where a lot of the trouble comes from as far as for us. So
Even if we address it within the procedural and call it
yeah,
out a little bit more
maybe.
there, because I don't want to be super restrictive
No.
in the policy. I understand our options are leave it as is or walk it back, and I don't know that I want to walk it back, but Library of Things is definitely a big concern for us too. So even if we can call it out in the procedures and the best practices piece of it, I think that would be helpful.
How about how we have the charts that have for like missing pieces? If it's from your library, do this. If it's from their library, do it a different way. We also have it with damaged items. So we just add something like that.
I don't know why that is coming through so broken up for me. I'm sorry, Cheryl.
I can summarize. It was if we could have a similar like flow chart to the damaged items where if it's your item, this is the step, and if it's not your item, this would be the step for things like this.
If the libraries want flowcharts, we can flowchart all day.
I think
Obviously that would be like a future. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna say, and didn't mean to cut you off, but I agree with you that a flow chart when you're working at the desk is usually not the best way to go. But even if it were like bullet points of best practices, that might be helpful because that is an easy thing to have at the desk and have staff refer to in the moment if they need to, or to just memorize more easily.
I do like the language, like Janine said, not to go back, go forward, and then change, and then a procedure. Like, and then each library can then determine their procedure and their local best practices within those guidelines that CCS has provided for us. I do think, like Jennifer brings up good points about the library of things, because yes, it is a lot. And then there's also patrons, like when you looked at the hold limits at certain libraries or the checkout limits, someone can take out 150 items, no problem. But my hold limit is 1,000. So what does that look like? And we're working on that right now. But, like those sorts of things, it adds up. And I think the procedure is where it goes. The policy is what defines how we do the procedure from there. And I think Carrie said it like adding something specific to a policy that may evolve or change, then we have to come back and reevaluate it. But I like the language.
I agree with, oh, sorry, I agree with that. I just don't want to lose the piece of getting to the second part of this, that So yes, I don't want to go back, do like the language where it's at, but I don't want to lose that next step for us.
Um, I I'm all for refining our procedures to kind of help shape workflows and guidance. Once we get to that point, I think the one thing I am would like to protect against is getting too specific where we come rigid again. So I just want to avoid situations where it's like, if the patron owes over $50, then call the library. So just keep that in mind once we kind of are moving into this next step. Okay, I'm going to share that draft again. Take a look at it one more time. If you are comfortable with this revision, what we'll do today is we'll take a motion to recommend the policy revision. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll take it next to Circ Tech for discussion. If they if the Circ Tech agrees to recommend it, then it will go to governance for a formal adoption.
Miyako, this is super small potatoes, but on that second section, I just keep wanting to put like, however, comma, member libraries, because it is still in direct conflict with that top one to be like, you're supposed to refuse. However, like, if needs arise, you can, but that might be.
No, I understand that.
Carrie, I was an English teacher, so my brain was doing the
English
same.
major. Yeah.
Yeah, same thing. Miyako, I'm also wondering if instead of shall, should it be may?
Hmm.
But that's again just a wordy thing that totally up to the group.
Do other libraries waive charges? That's the other part of the sentence that I'm having trouble. I don't think I would ever waive a charge. I would leave as is and check out. But I'm just wondering if I would accept a reduced payment, but would I waive a charge?
I mean, when you're talking about best practices, I will say just yesterday I had a bill from another library and they charge processing fees and we do not. And I waived those before the patron paid.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. I forgot about that. Thank you, Janine.
Mhm.
Any other potential adjustments? Would anyone like to make a motion to recommend the patrons with blocks policy revision?
I make a motion to recommend the patron with cost policy revision.
I'd like to
Second?
second, I'd like to second that motion to recommend the policy revision.
All in favor?
Hi.
Hi.
I
And any opposed? Okay. We will take the revision, move it along then. Whew, that's a good session. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Kiara now.
All right, Mako, if you don't mind popping back over to that PowerPoint. Thank you so much. All right, so the next topic we have is 4B, clarifying claimed items not found procedure. This topic, Mika, if you don't mind going next. This topic came up because the claim item not found procedure states that staff will determine if an item should be billed, but it doesn't specify whether that staff refers to the home or returning library or the owning library. So Kim noticed this language and It's different from our other procedures, like the damage procedure that states that the owning library should not apply a bill without the knowledge of the returning library. So if we go to the next slide, the CCS recommendation for a revision here would be to just include that same kind of language at the end of the claims item document that would refer to specifying library should not apply without the knowledge of the claiming library. So pretty straightforward one, but we can hop off the PowerPoint, have any questions and share your thoughts on this one? Kim, if you want to pop in at any point too to share your experience, feel free, but no pressure.
It just came up. We had a patron say, why did they have a bill? They thought they returned it, resolved it, and then the owning library charged the patron, and we had no idea that this was going on. So I went back to the procedures or the policy, and the language wasn't really clear. So I just wanted to make sure that it was clear because this was like caught us off guard.
Kim, just to say Miyako all the time, asking her for clarification. Kim, your clarification, that is an item that was resolved, just marked as claimed, whether it was in the owning library, turned that claim into a charge. Okay, just making sure, because this is new to me, because I haven't experienced that happening, and that would be very confusing as a patron.
Yes. I also don't like the fact that when you resolve a claim, if the patron has return receipts or the email receipts, they get that notification that it was waived or zero. That's just an internal thing that I think is kind of weird. So you have to check it in and then do the steps from there.
Well, and I'm going to jump on what Carrie said, that like not only for a patron is that confusing, that would have been very confusing even for me as a staff member. And especially because at our library, if we are claiming something as returned or not found, we're never going back and charging them. We're making the call that we're letting them off the hook for that one. And so if another library chose to bill them, that would be very confusing and I wouldn't want it to happen. So I like the idea of adding the clarification that only the home library can do that.
So I make a motion to change the language to mirror that of the damage policy where I forget if it says the owning library's home material, or they must get in contact with the patron or the claiming libraries. Thanks. I make a motion to recommend adding language to the claim item documentation that specifies libraries should not apply a bill without the knowledge of the claiming library.
Beautiful. Can I get a second?
I second.
I would second that. Oh, either one of us.
Double second.
Beautiful. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Okay, so this one will also go over to the Circ technical group and they will vote for final approval. And I believe that's all of our business for today. Are there any thoughts or questions before I end our meeting today?
I do have a question,
Yes,
just
go for it.
because so this happens more regularly and we're seeing it. So if a library, this is for hold, placing a hold, your library doesn't own the item and the pop-up comes up that says the patron has exceeded the material limits for this material type. I think that's what it says. And then staff say, okay, we'll just override it and place the hold, hoping we either purchase one or after so much time, the library will lend it and then they move up in the queue. Is that something we're supposed to be doing or do we abide by that specific block? Does everyone know what I'm talking about for like new materials, especially like RBPs? It says this person cannot place a hold on this type of material. And then you click yes, place the hold, yes.
I'm not saying it never happens, but we should not be overriding those. The expectation is that here we will not override those blocks.
I don't know if this is like a past question. I just wondered.
My recommendation is to, in terms like I'm gonna like talk in circles here, and I apologize in advance. You may want to consider like material type and like the title. So something like book new, like book regular, override it. And then, like you said, once it moves into like a regular book, then they'll become eligible and something will trap for them. Sometimes read that messaging because sometimes you will say like not all material limits exceeded because that bib may have a mixture of like DVD hot and DVD new, and the patron is eligible for DVD new. So I would say probably in the most common cases, it's safe to override. And then when they are either, if there's stuff on the bib that they're eligible for, they will get it. Or when something moves out of new status, they'll get it.
I've seen that message enough times, and I don't know that I've ever made that distinction that you just made, Mieko, that my workaround was always like, okay, can the patron put this on hold for themselves in the power pack? And if they don't run into that error message, I'm like, okay, then they're fine. It's something with the differing material types versus whether they can or cannot.
We've had staff just come down from the different floors and just say, why am I getting this block or anything like that? And it's usually for RBPs. So that's why, like it was for the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, the RBP couldn't place a hold on it. So we had to, like, I guess that's a big one, like RBPs, if just we weren't able to place it. But yes, I liked your idea, Carrie. If they could place it in the power pack, then they could place it on hold. Okay, that was just my question.
Great. Any
I
other
do.
questions?
Yeah,
Yeah, go
me.
for it.
Something I just ran into recently as well is it was an item. Let me make sure I get this right. It was a bib record for like a volume 2 of a book. Um, that was its own standalone bib record. It wasn't like split out, like they all had the same bib record, volume 1, 2, 3. And I believe it was Vernon area who obviously had it cataloged differently, and they were the only one that had it distinguished as a volume 2. And so whenever a hold was trying to be placed on that item, we would get that prompt that said like, well, do you want to specify which volume or do you just want any bib level hold? And it was only because of this one item record that had it distinguished as a volume 2. My question being, if that made any sense at all for folks, is uh, should I just reach out to the owning library and be like, hey, this is causing an issue for a patron to put an item on hold, because when they say, yeah, I want volume 2, it's only trying to fill literally that Vernon area item versus the entire bib record, which is technically all volume 2. I don't want to go rogue and start editing other libraries' item records, but I also don't want to bog down like Dustin and be like, hey, look at this kind of thing. And I just was wondering what the best policies would be for that.
Miko, do you agree to reach out to Dustin? That would be my
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm sure he would be happy to hear from you.
That did come up, Carrie, just out of curiosity. It came up with one of the new books because the barcode wasn't in because it had yet to be cataloged. So that came up as not able to be placed on hold because the library that owned it had yet to put a barcode in it too. So that came up recently with us. We couldn't understand why we couldn't place a hold on something, and it was because it was like we needed the barcode.
Yeah. And it's once again, it's that difference of interface between like what we can see in Leap versus what patrons can see in the Power Pack. Dang magazines like haunt me every time because
yeah.
I do the unfillable items every week and half of them are magazines and it's like, no, it can't be filled. Like it's just this. But like I said, I didn't want to go rogue versus bother folks, but I will bother Dustin and be like, hey, take this out.
Is there possible to make a recommendation for the Library of Things material to have the library have their name in it? I've noticed it's one thing that we're working towards in specific things, but I've noticed a lot of staff are overriding Library of Things materials and placing them on hold for other libraries. That they have the same thing, they just grabbed the wrong bib record. So that's
You
just
should
something to pass
have
along.
Jessica take that too.
Yeah.
In the cataloging groups.
Yeah. I don't know. It just tends to happen a little bit more, I think, like when you own the same thing. So yes, I will make a recommendation. Jessica, if you're watching this, go do that.
I second that unofficial recommendation because we were having that issue with hotspots until we put FRV PLD, and that's for everything now. So even if a staff can't remember the exact name of the CD player, they can just type in FRV PLD and it's like, boom, that's all of the library of things.
Yeah.
I also agree with this, even though we don't do it. Please force us to.
I also think that would be helpful, but there are some things where like we're sharing the bib record, like the telescope I'm looking at, it's like everybody. Well, not everyone, that's over exaggerating, but like Gila, Fremont, Park Ridge, Warden Grove, like everyone has like the same bib record for that in particular. Whereas like, yeah, the hotspots are different for different libraries and whatnot.
I feel like that would be so, I don't know what it takes. I mean, even going to library school, I still don't know what that takes to like separate that record out and be like, hey, can I just take that data from my item record and create a new bib record that's just me, but keep all that historical data. That would be awesome. That's my thought, because I know the kilowatt hour one is like every single library has that one from what is it, ComEd? Well, we'll push it up to our technical services cataloging people.
Right. Great ideas, great questions. Anything else? No? All right, then I will go ahead and adjourn our meeting. We will next meet on March 12th, 2026 is what we had on the calendar, but we are going to try to adjust that to a February date. And we expressed interest in an in-person meeting, so we could talk about that moving closer to the date. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
Second.
I'll second.
Perfect. All in favor?
Aye.
I
Any opposed? All right, I will adjourn the meeting at 10:58 a.m. Thanks, everyone.